One of the worst aspects of being in a relationship with a narcissist is the cognitive dissonance. It's the emotional discomfort and the mental discomfort that comes from holding two conflicting narratives in your mind about this person, about the relationship, and about yourself at the same time. These two narratives are in conflict with each other. And what it does is it hurts you, it mentally exhausts you. And that exhaustion is analogous to a person who's in the sea. They're in the sea and they have a boat and they're rowing. And they're trying to find their way back to land. They're trying to find their way back to solid ground. But they don't have a compass. And so they go in the direction that their instinct tells them to. And they just row that boat and they're wearing themselves out. They're hungry, they're thirsty, they're tired, but they keep rowing. And they row until they get to a point where they have this premonition. And the premonition says, you know what? You're rowing in the wrong direction. You got to go the other way. And they're certain at that point, just as certain as they were going north. Now they're equally certain that they're supposed to be going south. And so they turn around and they go in the very opposite direction. And they keep rowing and rowing until they get exhausted. And they still don't see land. There's no land in sight. And then they have another premonition that tells them to go east and tells them to go west. And they never reach land. And that is what it's like to experience cognitive dissonance when you're in a relationship with a narcissist. Because you, at certain points, you're completely convinced that this is someone who loves you, who cares about you. And they just have flaws. They just have these imperfections that make it where it's a difficult relationship. But you reason with yourself, you justify it. And you say, well, that's normal. Relationships have problems. And you commit yourself to it. And you try to make it work. And you try to understand this person. You try to love this person until it gets to a point where something happens. Something triggers something inside of you that make the scales fall off your eyes and you see this person for who they are. You see behind that mask and you can't unsee it. And just as certain as you were that this is a good person who loves you, that just makes mistakes, now you're equally certain that this is a person who doesn't love you. This is a person who's hurting you, and you go in the opposite direction. And when you go in that direction, it's like clarity, but it's also surreal because you look into the fantasy. Now that you've waken up, you're awake, you look into the fantasy that you were in and you wonder how you could have believed that, how you missed the red flags, how you didn't catch on to their game and what they were doing. And you feel just as certain being outside of the fantasy, being in reality, having escaped the matrix, having come out of the rabbit hole. You feel just as certain that where you are now is the right place where you're supposed to be and that this person is the monster behind the mask. But then what happens is you go into dopamine withdrawal and your nervous system starts to make you feel in this state of fight or flight or freeze fawn. You just don't feel comfortable in your body. You don't feel safe. And that lack of safety triggers euphoric recall where you start thinking about the narcissist because your body is trying to get you back into the abuse cycle. So you start thinking about this person and thinking about the love bomb and thinking about the good times and thinking about, oh, well, they did do these other things for me. You have these anchor memories that pull you right back into the fantasy. And before you know it, you give in to that fantasy and you start rowing that boat back in the opposite direction, back into the opposite direction. And once you get into the fantasy world and you get that hit of dopamine because you made up now and you feel connected and you feel good again, you feel normal again, then you're just as equally certain that when you were outside of the fantasy, that was the fantasy, that the fantasy is real and that reality was the fantasy. And it's the constant switching back and forth between those two narratives that gets you mentally exhausted. And it gets you to a point where you feel like you can't even trust your reality. You can't trust your ability to perceive reality correctly, which makes you just want to sit in the middle of the sea and give up and surrender. And that's when the narcissist has you exactly where they want you. But in order to break through and get the clarity that you need, what you have to do is you have to stay consistent on the path that you know. You have to stick with reality. You have to have a support system. You have to have people around you who can give you a compass so you know which way is north.